Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the house felt calm after a long day. He sat on the couch, half listening to the faint hum of the television, while his wife scrolled absent-mindedly on her phone. Out of nowhere, she put the device down, looked him in the eye, and said, "I need to see if size really matters. You'll never understand." The words hit him like a stone thrown into still water, shattering the calm. For a moment, he thought he had misheard, but the expression on her face left no room for doubt. His chest tightened, heat rushed to his ears, yet his voice betrayed none of it. "Okay," he said softly, almost mechanically. The silence that followed was louder than any argument they had ever had. Inside, disbelief churned with fear, and beneath it all, a suppressed anger he didn't yet dare release. He was the kind of man who had always kept things steady, loyal to a fault, hardworking, predictable in his habits, and quietly proud of providing for the life they built together. But deep within, he carried insecurities he rarely confessed, the kind that gnawed at him when he compared himself to others or thought too long about what he lacked. His wife, on the other hand, had always seemed so sure of herself, intelligent, attractive, full of wit, yet lately restless. There were times when her laughter felt a little too forced, her gaze drifting somewhere far away. They had been married 7 years, and though love still lived between them, the cracks were beginning to show, small fractures widening into dangerous gaps. Her words, that night planted seeds, he could not ignore. They spoke of more than curiosity. They hinted at temptation, at betrayal waiting just beyond the horizon. For him, it wasn't just about physicality. It was about love, trust, and the meaning of commitment. He suddenly found himself standing on a thin line. Should he confront her, demand clarity, or stay silent and observe? Silence promised safety, at least for a while, but it also meant swallowing his pride. Confrontation could lead to answers, but also to the destruction of everything he held dear. As he lay in bed later, her words echoed over and over. Was it a cruel joke, an experiment to test his reaction, or the naked truth of her desires? He searched her face as she drifted into sleep, but no answer came. All he could do was lie awake, still and quiet, rehearsing conversations he might never have, choosing, for now, not to explode but to wait. The mask of calm he wore that evening became his armor, even as turmoil raged beneath. And in that decision, the first turn in their story quietly began. He barely slept that night, her words replaying in a relentless loop, each echo sharper than the last. Every detail of their past together came rushing back to him. Their first kiss, their wedding vows, the long nights when intimacy felt like safety rather than something to be measured or compared. Yet now, all of it seemed fragile, hanging by the thread of a single sentence. He questioned himself in ways he never had before. Was he enough? Had he ever been? The thought gnawed at him. Maybe she was right, maybe I'll never understand. Over the next days, her behavior began to change in ways he couldn't ignore. She became more distant in her conversations, almost detached, but at the same time, oddly bold. She lingered longer in front of the mirror, trying on dresses she hadn't worn in years, applying makeup with more care than usual. She left the house with a sense of purpose that unsettled him, and when she returned, her perfume still clung to the air as though mocking the silence that filled their home. Her words grew sharper too, laced with subtle hints, comments about curiosity, about what other women experience, about how life was too short to live without knowing. Each remark landed like a dagger disguised as casual conversation. He tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy, smiling at the right moments, speaking in the same measured tone, but inside he was unraveling. To cope, he began journaling late at night, scribbling down his thoughts in the quiet hours when she was asleep or away. The pages quickly filled with confessions he could never voice aloud. Fear, anger, longing, and the heavy shadow of inadequacy. He turned to books and articles, searching desperately for answers about relationships, about trust and betrayal, as though understanding the theory might somehow help him survive the reality. At times, he even considered marriage counseling, but the thought brought no relief. Would she even agree to sit in the same room and speak honestly? Or had they already crossed the invisible line of no return? The signs grew more obvious as days passed. She clutched her phone a little too tightly, her fingers moving quickly when she typed late into the night. Whenever he walked into the room, she tilted the screen away, smiling faintly as if nothing were out of place. He noticed her laughter drifting down the hallway, but it wasn't shared with him anymore. His suspicions thickened like storm clouds, yet he said nothing. Instead, he let the silence grow between them, each of them pretending not to notice the widening distance. It was an unspoken war, one fought with avoidance, glances, and the hollow sound of words left unsaid. And then, one night, the silence shattered. She came home later than usual, her steps light, but her face unreadable. He sat in the living room, waiting, pretending to flip through a book. When she walked in, he asked casually, as though it didn't matter, "Where were you?" For a moment, she just looked at him, her lips curving into a faint smile that chilled him more than anger ever could. "Don't worry," she said softly, setting her bag down. "I just needed to see for myself." The words landed heavier than anything she had ever spoken before. His chest tightened, his stomach dropped, and for the first time, he truly felt the ground shifting beneath him. The mask he had worn, the calm he had maintained, all of it faltered in that instant. He didn't respond, couldn't respond. He just sat there, his heart sinking into a silence that felt bottomless. The silence between them had stretched for too long, each passing day tightening its grip around his chest. He had tried to ignore it, tried to bury the storm inside him, but when her late-night absences grew into routine and her cryptic words lingered like smoke, he realized he could no longer carry the weight alone. One evening, when the tension was unbearable, he finally broke. "Do you love me?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Or are you just testing me?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flickered to the floor, to the wall, anywhere but his face. The silence dragged on until she finally whispered, "It's not about love, it's about truth." His chest burned. Her words weren't just an admission. They were a dismissal of everything he thought they had built together. He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "So my love isn't enough." Her gaze lifted, soft but unwavering. "It is," she said slowly, "but sometimes enough doesn't feel complete." The words sliced deeper than anger ever could. Desire versus commitment. He could see the battle written across her face, but it wasn't a battle she intended to fight with him. For her, this was about chasing what she thought she had missed. For him, it was about holding on to the promise they had once made. Something inside him snapped. For weeks, he had worn a mask of calm, swallowing his pain, hiding behind observation. But now the dam broke. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine," he said, his voice louder, raw. "You wanted to know if size matters. I want to know if loyalty does." The room grew heavy with his words, the air thick with unspoken wounds. His anger spilled out, not wild, but deliberate, each sentence carrying the weight of betrayal. Yet within his rage was also vulnerability, the naked fear of a man who had given everything and now stood on the edge of losing it all. She didn't flinch at his outburst. Instead, she sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to explain. "I married young," she began, her voice low, "before I ever really knew who I was, before I ever explored anything outside of us. And now, after all these years, I feel incomplete. like there are parts of me I never allowed myself to discover. Her confession stung, not because of its honesty, but because of what it implied, that their life together had never been enough to satisfy her. I thought if I tested my desires, she continued, if I saw for myself what I've been wondering about, then maybe I could finally know who I am. I don't want to live wondering what I missed. He stared at her, his jaw clenched, his heart aching with every word. To her, this was about curiosity, about closure. To him, it was about dismantling the very foundation of their marriage. He struggled to process her reasoning, to reconcile the woman he loved with the woman who now rationalized betrayal as self-discovery. The silence stretched again, but this time he didn't hold it. His voice came cold, sharp, stripped of tenderness. Then go, he said, each word deliberate. But understand, you'll never measure the value of what you're about to lose. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything either of them had spoken before. For the first time, she looked shaken, as if the reality of his resolve had struck her harder than her own confessions. The distance between them wasn't just emotional now. It was a chasm, one that might never be crossed again. She packed a small bag the next morning, her face carefully composed, her voice steady as she said she needed space. He didn't argue. He didn't beg or plead. He simply stepped aside and watched her leave, the sound of the closing door reverberating through the house like a final verdict. The silence that followed was deafening. At first, it was unbearable. Loneliness pressed against him like a weight he couldn't lift. Nights felt longer, meals tasteless, and the empty side of the bed reminded him constantly of what was missing. But mixed with the pain was something unexpected, a fragile sense of relief. The storm that had been circling inside their home had finally broken, and though it left destruction in its wake, at least it was no longer hidden. In the days that followed, he found himself wandering. He took long walks through familiar streets, noticing things he hadn't paid attention to in years, the smell of wet grass after rain, the laughter of children playing, the quiet rhythm of life moving on without him. He revisited old hobbies that had once given him joy before marriage consumed his energy, sketching in a worn notebook, fixing small things around the house, even cooking meals he'd long forgotten how to prepare. Each act was small, almost trivial, but it reminded him he was more than just a husband defined by her presence. When he met with an old friend for coffee, the words spilled out before he could stop them. His friend listened patiently, not offering easy platitudes, but instead giving perspective. "You've given her everything you could," the friend said gently. "If she still feels empty, that says more about her than about you." Those words stayed with him, echoing louder each time he tried to take the blame. Slowly, he began to see that her choices were not a reflection of his worth, but of her own unrest. Meanwhile, her own path was unfolding differently. She ventured into the world she thought she wanted, testing her curiosities, stepping into desires she had convinced herself were essential. At first, it carried a thrill, the rush of novelty, the spark of something different. But the spark was fleeting. Physical satisfaction gave her what she sought in the moment. Yet it dissolved quickly, leaving behind an emptiness she hadn't anticipated. She realized that fulfillment was not the same as excitement, and truth was not found in fleeting pleasures. The more she chased, the more hollow she felt, as though every step forward only deepened the void inside her. Back at home, he began writing letters he never intended to send. Late at night, when the weight of her absence pressed hardest, he poured his heart onto paper. He wrote of anger and betrayal, of longing and disappointment, but also of love, of memories he cherished, of the hope that maybe one day they could rebuild something new. In those letters, he found clarity. They were not desperate pleas, but reflections of a man beginning to understand himself, to grow stronger, to stand on his own without needing her validation. Then, One evening, the silence broke again. The sound of the door opening startled him. And there she stood, her face pale, her eyes tired, her posture sagging as though she carried a burden too heavy to bear. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't glowing with the satisfaction of discovery. She was broken. Her voice trembled as she admitted, "I thought I'd feel alive. Instead, I feel lost." He listened quietly, his emotions clashing inside him. Anger that she had left, pain that she had chosen others over him, but also compassion for the woman he once vowed to love through every trial. Her confession didn't erase the hurt, but it revealed her humanity, fragile and flawed. For the first time in weeks, the choice no longer belonged solely to her. It was his turn to decide what came next. They sat across from each other, the house unusually quiet, as though even the walls were holding their breath. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, there were no defenses, no sarcasm, no avoidance, just two people stripped bare of excuses. Her eyes searched his face, weary but searching, desperate for something she could not quite name. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Can you forgive me?" He leaned back, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze steady. The words rose slowly, measured, and deliberate. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. His tone carried no anger, only a heavy truth. She flinched at the distinction, realizing that even if the wound healed, the scar would always remain. What happened next could take two different paths, two roads born from the same moment of truth. If reconciliation was to be chosen, it would not be easy. He would agree, cautiously, to try again, but on different terms. Together. They would begin therapy, sitting in rooms where uncomfortable honesty was required, learning to peel back the layers of silence that had smothered their marriage for so long. They would relearn how to speak to one another without fear, how to rebuild trust brick by brick, knowing each stone would take time and patience to set. It would be slow, uncertain, and fragile, but in that slowness lived the possibility of healing. The ending would not be triumphant, but it would carry a cautious hope that perhaps love, when tended carefully, could survive even the harshest storms. But there was another path, one he could not ignore. If separation was the choice, it would come not from bitterness but from clarity. He would look at her, at the woman he once loved so fiercely, and realize that love without trust was a house built on sand. It could not stand, no matter how much effort he poured into it. He would choose to let go, not because he no longer cared, but because holding on would destroy him. The ending would be bittersweet, the pain of loss woven with the quiet relief of freedom. As he walked away, he would carry the knowledge that he had given everything he could, and that sometimes love's greatest act is in letting go. No matter which path unfolded, one truth remained unshaken. In the quiet that followed their final conversation, he reflected on the lessons carved into his heart. Size had never mattered, respect did. Desire, unchecked by loyalty, led not to fulfillment but to ruin. And love, he now knew, was never proven in fantasies or fleeting temptations, but in the steady patience of sacrifice, in the quiet daily acts of choosing one another. His story did not end with grand gestures or dramatic closure, but with a reflection that carried both weight and wisdom. She had wanted to chase something fleeting, to measure what could never be measured. But he had discovered something greater, something enduring. She wanted to know if size mattered. He thought as he watched her, whether sitting beside him in therapy or fading from his life forever. I learned instead that what truly matters is the size of a heart, and hers was never big enough to hold me. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel, Awesome Visual Story,